Hello and welcome to the big picture. Following the confrontation between the Centre and the Reliance Industries Limited over the CAG audit of its exploration of the KG D6 gas basin, the NDA government is proposing to scrutinize all future contracts for oil and gas fields by the CAG. This is expected to safeguard government revenues and avoid legal disputes like the one which the Reliance is having with the government right now. Already the Reliance has been imposed a penalty of rupees 14,200 crores or $2.37 billion, including the rupees 3,474 crores or $579 million imposed by the NDA government earlier this week for failing to meet the gas production commitment. The new policy, which intends to allow CAG to conduct audit of all oil and gas field contracts in future, however, may not be applicable to the KG D6 contract. How beneficial will the proposed policy be? Will it lead to more transparency, and also whether it would encourage companies to invest in oil and gas exploration, and if it would have any effect on the ongoing litigation between the Reliance and the government, and if this same policy can be extended to other sectors also. We will discuss all this today with TSR Subramanian, former Cabinet Secretary, Anil Razdan, former Secretary Ministry for Power and Energy Consultant, Prashant Bhushan, Supreme Court Advocate, and Paranjoy Guha Thakurta, Senior Journalist and author of the book Gas Wars. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Subramanian, there has been this ongoing problem as far as these issues are concerned when it comes to oil and gas exploration. So you think this proposal, it's still in the proposal stage, as far as the government is concerned, you think this proposal of unified licensing policy will be better than the earlier profit-sharing policy?
Probably yes. I think based on experience, this is a much more neater and simpler kind of an arrangement. The probability or possibility of disputes probably will come down very sharply. I thought today the issue was about the CAG audit,
right,
and that was the issue. Well, I think these things should be usually, large things should be brought down to basic, simple, elementary issues. Public, the property belongs to the people of India, and public finances are involved. Our parliament is involved as representing the interests of the public, and CAG is the auditor of the people. Right. There is nothing to prevent the company from having their own auditors, and since public interest is involved, ownership vests here. I think it's the most natural thing. I cannot understand any kind of a logic that it will only be examined by my auditor. I can't understand that logic at all. To my mind, this is self-evident.
This has been the argument of the Reliance.
In every joint sector operation, it is important that the auditor is a technical person. It doesn't belong to A or B. He finds facts and he gives reasons why the facts are given. As in the 2G case or in the Colgate case, you may dispute it, you may not like it, etc., etc. And lastly, just to make a point, I won't press the point too hard. The experience in India, you have had the Arthur Andersons, etc. in England. In recent years, the experience in India is that the private auditors are all not devtas. I mean, I don't think I will implicitly trust my life with private auditors. And in fact, their main kind of prospects depend on, I have been a director in 5-6 major companies, so I have a small inkling. I'm not saying anything against anybody. All I am saying is that for them, public interest is about the last thing in their mind.
Mr. Razdan, one other thing is that, the CAG audit on future oil and gas discoveries and contracts which are going to take place. Let us get some clarity on this. The proposal of this new policy is apparently because of the experience the government of India has had in the KG D6 basin contract and the kind of litigations which are going on. In that contract, was there no provision for the CAG audit?
Well, I think the point that you're putting across, first of all, is the newspaper report today that we read.
Yes.
In one of the newspapers.
Right.
It's about this proposed addition and a proposal to probably go in for a revenue sharing model instead of a profit sharing model.
Right.
There is no certainty yet. I would very much like to first see a policy paper put across by the government so that we can discuss those precise proposals.
Right.
Because the weakness, I think, a major weakness as I see in the present system, whether you go for a production sharing contract or whether you go for a profit sharing or a revenue sharing model, is that we do not have a very strong technical advice to let us know precisely how a field is behaving and how much can be extracted out of it or should have been extracted. Normally, for a developing country which is trying to develop new fields in difficult areas, you go in for a profit sharing contract.
Right.
As opposed to a revenue sharing model. But I think the difficulties and the controversies which we have had in the past, particularly the very low production out of the KG D6 basin, I think maybe it points to a revenue sharing model, may be a better idea and lead to lesser disputes. But still, I would say the weakness will lie in not having a strong management committee for the particular oil fields. Secondly, you will have to have a very strong technical office or a consultant. At the moment, we have the DGH, but his role is a little ambiguous. Sometimes we say it's a technical arm of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and other times we say it's the upstream regulator.
Right.
There's not very much clarity in that. I think those issues will need to be sorted out. But finally, I think what will be the scope of the audit, if at all it comes out? Normally on a revenue side, you do have revenue audit, but then will the CAG be entitled to go in and say that the contractor could have produced more oil than he has produced? Is he looking for a price in the future? Is there a price for the oil or for the gas which is clearly settled for the duration of the whole contract? Or is this price going to change midstream, which will bring in other complications and other issues into the whole gamut of operations?
I think you've flagged some important issues there. Prashant, last month you people came out with you held a press conference, you came out with a CAG report on this KG-D6 basin. You think that now this new proposal which the government is supposed to be making about, is this something which could resolve some of the problems which has been there so far?
It will bring in a little more transparency and accountability in this whole business. You see, today under the CAG Act, the government can order a CAG audit of any entity. In fact, it was ordered for these discoms.
Right.
The High Court and the Supreme Court have further held that wherever there is any revenue share involved or any impact to the Consolidated Fund of India, there also the CAG should be auditing. So in the case of the telecom companies, they have held that. Now in all these oil contracts, whether they are profit sharing or revenue sharing, certainly Consolidated Fund of the country is involved, and therefore normally in any case they need to be audited by the CAG. It's another thing that in these oil contracts the CAG had not been auditing at least the part of the contractors like Reliance, etc. And even in this gas case, even after the government has allowed a CAG audit or asked for a CAG audit, Reliance is not allowing the CAG to look at their documents, their accounts, etc., and therefore creating great difficulties in the audit. So far as disputes are concerned, disputes are arising partly because of the flawed nature of the production sharing contract or the profit sharing contract, whatever you might call it, which create a huge incentive for the operator like Reliance to inflate their costs by over invoicing, etc., which is what the CAG has found in some of their reports. Of course, at that time they were doing the audit of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, but even in that audit they found that there was huge over invoicing, etc., involved. So you will have to change the nature of these contracts. In fact, in my view, The contract should be on the basis of who is, once the exploration has been done, once the prospecting has been done, which in my view should be done normally by the public sector, and once the data has been made available to all the bidders, the bids should be invited only on the basis of who is willing to offer the minimum cost per unit as the cost of extraction, and the rest of it should belong to the government.
Okay. Well, Paranjoy, there are 2-3 points which have been made. One by Mr. Razdan and Prashant also. Anil Razdan is raising the issue of how good the management committee would be. Would the CAG be able to go and say that how much have they produced enough, and things like that? There are several issues which have come up on this.
The points that have been made are all very, very important and very, very valid. Mr. Subramanian knows, because when he was cabinet secretary, the all these agreements, the production sharing contract was put together. Just to add to some of the points that have been, as Prashant Bhushan has rightly pointed out, the Controller and Auditor General of India was looking at the performance of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas.
Exactly.
In that context, it audited the way in which the production sharing contract with the Reliance Group was done. Now, Reliance has refused to share a lot of its data. But I think there are a couple of key issues that need to be flagged. What has been clear is that there are some major inadequacies in the contract itself. Incidentally, as is pointed out, it was not the CAG who described it as gold plating. It was Anil Ambani, Mr. Mukesh Ambani's own brother, who alleged that there was gold plating. That means superfluous capital expenditure, because you were assured that your capital expenditure would be reimbursed. That's the first point. Secondly, I think we haven't put in place dispute settlement mechanisms which should be there, which are there across the world.
What about this arbitration
Let me hear. It took 2 years. The Reliance Group has appointed Justice Bharucha, former Chief Justice of India. The Government of India appointed Justice Khare, former Chief Justice of India. It took 2 years for the Supreme Court to appoint the third arbitrator. Justice Nijjar appointed one arbitrator, then the Government Council said, no, he's on the Reliance list, so another person. Now, there has been a letter sent by Dr. E.S. Sharma saying that Justice Bharucha is not the appropriate person because he has worked for Reliance in the past. Now, these are issues that should be resolved in a manner in which it is happening. Take another case. The day before the results of the elections were announced on the 15th of May, India's biggest public sector company, ONGC, the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, moved the Delhi High Court against India's biggest private sector corporations, Reliance Industries, alleging that Reliance Industries had stolen 30,000 crores of gas. Now, all over the world, when you have such disputes, you have in place technical experts, dispute settlement mechanisms, which are not there in India.
So, what
ONGC says, we have been, one more point. As Mr. Razdan has rightly pointed out, we have a strange animal called the DGH, which is one way supposed to be a technical arm of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. It's another way supposed to be a regulator. We have a Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board, which with great difficulty is today getting into the issue of city distribution of gas and the pricing of gas. The point is, you do not create regulatory mechanisms which are at arm's length distance, which are truly autonomous and independent, which is why you have the kind of chaos and the confusion that is currently prevailing.
No, Paranjoy, what are you trying to say? That since there's so much confusion and things like that, if you have a policy where it is inbuilt that the CAG will audit these things, some of these problems are going to be resolved. Are you trying to say that?
It may happen, but we have to wait and watch and what the new policy would be like. Until you actually see the policy, one should not be speculating.
So, but I think all of you are agreed that the present policy of profit sharing contracts is not the right thing anymore.
Would you say that? We've seen from the recent experience. I mean,
Girish,
you have these disputes. You have a dispute.
I'll come to you, Mr. Razdan.
You have the government asking Reliance to pay up close to $2.4 billion, which is according to, over 3 years. And mind you, it was the UPA government and now it's the NDA government.
It's the NDA government. Both, yes, Mr. Razdan.
Yes, I think, Girish, we may have to distinguish between two kinds of fields. One which are properly and well explored and their potential is well established and known. There, probably a revenue sharing contract may work very well. But where it's a whole area of uncertainty and a prospector may not know how much he's going to invest, he may not be very confident of entering into a revenue sharing model. That's
Mr.
what I think.
Razdan.
First, you have got to be technically very well equipped to deal with either situation.
No,
and
Mr.
then you
Razdan.
decide. You may have to have a dual kind of a contract mode.
Okay, but,
Yes.
but Mr. Razdan, what do you think of what Prashant Bhushan suggested, that all prospecting should be done by a public sector like ONGC, so that there is more clarity on what is the availability of the resources there?
Probably, you see, that will only mean that you can only give out those fields which are fully prospected and given out. Because you see, ONGC's own track record of exploitation of oil from the wells allotted to it has not been particularly good. But we should, in any case, I would much rather have a public sector undertaking, but may not be. We may have to get somebody else, but a greater confidence would certainly be in a public sector undertaking. And we must know what the reserves are.
Okay.
But there are going to be areas and fields where we do not yet know precisely. There we may have to get in explorers who will explore and produce.
Okay, yes, Mr. Subramanian.
Girish, I think we're mixing up, or rather...
No, I want you to, one thing which Paranjoy was talking about, it was during your time that some of these contracts were evolved and things like that.
It's not
Well,
factually
is it correct?
The facts are like this,
Yes.
that the NELP as a concept was agreed upon. The Petroleum Ministry, Vijay Kelkar was there, Petroleum Secretary those days. He prepared the concept. It was cleared in 1997. The contracting was not done at that point of time. In fact, whether it was profit sharing or revenue sharing was not even discussed at that particular point of time. That we will divide them into 40 or 45 blocks, do it in 2-3 phases. And it was also said at that time that we will give 3 or 4 blocks now as a learning experience, and as we go along, the policy for the rest will follow. This is what my memory says. Number one, here the issue is like in governance. It is not which method of governance. It is who governs and how, which is more important than that. Here the issue has been complicated by one large private company, which has been able, to put it crudely, to infiltrate the government and ensure that governments work for it, rather than it works for the government. I mean, as contractor. I mean, I have seen this umpteen times in districts where the local contractor is really calling all the shots and changing all the rules. The critical problem here has been this, that you had a contract and you changed the contract. Now you are disputing whether the new price is good or bad. There is no call for you to change the $2.7 at all. That has been the fundamental problem here, number one. No, it is nobody's case today. The 2.7 is not viable in
2.37.
2.34 is not viable here. We now come to the future. How to settle this is a different question now. CAG is not a policy maker. CAG is only an auditor who watches interest. Razdan's point is perfectly valid. We need a strong technical committee with international knowledge supporting the government of India on the question of exploration, on the question of bidding, etc., etc. I think in hindsight, I would prefer now a revenue sharing model to a profit model, precisely because governments are so porous and governments are so vulnerable to influence. I would prefer that only for that reason. Otherwise, a profit sharing model probably is better. So there are two separate issues. One is we need to handle the special issues where we have, in a sense, allowed a contract to be broken against public interest. That is the critical point here, number one. Number two is have a new paradigm for the future where the CAG clearly has to have a role. I agree entirely. We need to have a strong regulator, a strong regulator and a strong technical advisor.
No, at what stage do you think the CAG should come in?
No, see, the CAG, like an auditor, can come in any good company. The CAG can come in, the auditor can come in at the post-M&A stage, pre-M&A stage, because he is an auditor. His advice is
even at the bidding stage, you think it can come in?
Probably not. Probably not. He's an auditor. Okay. He looks at books, certifies the books.
After expenditure has been made. Yes.
See, one small point.
Yes.
any private company, private enterprise is bound to look at maximization of its profits and maximization of the returns to shareholders as its primary goal. It is the government which is the custodian of resources that belong to the people of the country, who has to ensure that that public interest is served.
Right.
The Controller and Auditor General of India is a constitutional authority who is mandated by the Constitution of India to ensure that the public money, public finances are properly spent.
Okay. Prashant? Prashant, how do you look at it? Now, do you think that or what do you think? You think the CAG should come in at what stage if this new policy which has been proposed comes into being?
Well, firstly, we must understand that the Comptroller and Auditor General is one of the finest institutions that has evolved in this country. It has had a long tradition of great professionalism. There are several layers of checking and accountability that go into CAG audits. In fact, in this very case, while auditing the Petroleum Ministry, the CAG did point out that the profit sharing contract with Reliance is a totally flawed contract,
right,
because it creates a very strong incentive to inflate their costs. In fact, normally when a company spends more money, their profits come down. But in this particular contract, the more money that Reliance spends or claims to have spent, their profits actually go up,
right,
at the expense. So for example, if they inflate their cost by $100 million, their profits, instead of coming down by $100 million, can even go up by $200 million. And the government of India would lose this entire $300 million.
Right.
So therefore, it's a very peculiar kind of contract which the CAG did audit and found that it's a totally flawed contract. Right. Whoever drew up this contract was not in his right senses. He couldn't even make out that this creates such a perverse incentive to inflate your costs.
Right. So now, okay, so
therefore, in my view, the CAG needs to audit everything, including the contract itself.
Mr. Razdan?
Yes, I think, Prashantji, with all due respect, it may be a little difficult for the CAG to start vetting contracts. I started my life in the legal profession, then joined the CAG establishment before joining the IAS.
Okay.
So I do not know whether the CAG should be able to step in and give legal advice whether a contract has been rightly framed or not. But certainly he will step in once the revenues or the reserves of the government are involved, and he should step in there. But the point of conflict, in my view, will arise when CAG would like to go in for a performance audit. That have you actually produced as much as you could have produced, or you produced lesser for whatever reasons? Now that is a grey area, in my opinion, in respect of a revenue audit, at least.
Okay, when Mr. Performance...
Because the other point
last year,
taken of maximizing the profits.
1 second. Yeah, okay, Mr. Razdan, I think you have raised very important point here. Last year we were talking about performance audit and things like that when it came to 2G and several other things. Now, what do you think of it?
Look, Razdan has raised very correct points. I think in every good company, the the auditor raises the question of whether a particular M&A should have been entered into or not, successful or not. Was the acquisition at the right price or not? You may argue it is none of their business. It is only their business to look at the books. So I think there are two jobs that they do. One is look at the correctness of the books of the accounts. Number two, look at the quality of the operation. In this particular case, gold plating, non-gold plating, whether they could have accelerated the recoveries, etc., or not. They are given an opinion here, and that opinion is to be tested by the facts. So the performance audit, it is certainly part of their mandate, but they are getting two types of audit. One, audit of the books for accuracy.
Absolutely.
The other one is performance audit, which is for you to think, for management to think, for government to think, and to say, look at all these aspects to see what is right, what is wrong.
Paranjoy, performance, no, 1 second, performance audit, which means in the case of KG-D6, for instance, there was this commitment of 80 MMSCD or whatever. And now the latest we are told is
Million
that
metric standard
Yes,
cubic meters a
SCMD.
day.
okay. And today we are told that, the latest production is just about 9 SCD.
That's right. It is barely 20%.
Barely 20% or 10%. Now the latest figures apparently is just around 10-15%. So can CAG come into these kind of issues?
Okay, look at the issues that are involved. The Controller and Auditor General, as has been pointed out by both Mr. Subramanian and Mr. Razdan, has an important role to play. Look at the consequences. You said a certain amount of gas would be coming out. You are actually producing 20% of that.
Right.
You've set up huge capacities to manufacture fertilizers, to generate electricity, which are also working at 20% capacity or 25% capacity. Now, who determines what is the system of resolution of the conflict? You have Reliance Industries Limited saying that, this is due to geological surprises, these are natural rock formations, one minute, natural rock formations, etc., etc. You have another set of people, including Mr. Gopalakrishnan, who's saying you did not dig the number of wells you were supposed to dig, you did not conduct the drill stem test, you did not explore the discovery area. 1 minute. Who resolves this dispute?
Exactly.
So you have to have dispute resolution mechanisms in place. And
yes, but we need someone to point out. So we have to ask the CAG, you should in fact encourage him to point out.
Exactly.
He's not resolving the dispute.
So,
he
Mr.
is saying
Razdan,
these are unanswered questions.
Both Mr. Razdan and Prashant very quickly.
Sir.
Yes. So Mr. Razdan, we are running out of time. Very quickly, I want you to.
Sir,
Yes, Mr. Razdan.
Yeah. I'd say that, you see, before a dispute resolution mechanism, we've got to pay greater attention to the management committees of each of these blocks which is allotted.
Obviously.
Because there
No
you have to be very
disagreement.
strongly represented, and these
When you say,
investments
Mr.
of
Razdan,
prudence, whether you should go in for this or not,
Mr.
they have
Razdan-
to be settled in those management committees.
Mr. Razdan, when you say management
in the first
committees, what do you mean? Management committee of the private contractor, or is it the government? Is it the government the representatives who are going to be on that committee? What do you mean by that?
Yes, no. This is a committee which is there for each block which is allotted.
Okay.
Which is supposed to, in fact, they clear the expenditure, and government representatives are there, but unfortunately very poorly represented or very inadequately represented.
Okay.
I think the problem starts there.
Okay, Prashant, very quickly, last word. So you think that if this proposal of the government comes through, we may have lesser problems in the future. And one second thing is there any way in which this new proposal of new proposed contract could be applicable with retrospective effect at all?
No, government can always order CAG audit of any existing contract or any existing company. That's very clearly provided in the CAG Act. It has ordered CAG audit in this particular contract, but unfortunately Reliance has not been cooperating with it. We have seen that all these private companies involved in the exploitation of natural resources have led to very serious problems. There has been enormous loot of natural resources of this country. There has been enormous environmental degradation because all this mining, etc., have been done quite rapaciously without caring about the environment, without caring about the social costs, etc. In my view, these things should normally be reserved with the public sector. And at any rate, if private companies are to be involved, they should be only involved as contractors for the simple purpose of extraction of the reserve.
And with that,
and they should bid.
Okay, Prashant, we completely run out of time. So this is an issue which will require much more discussion, but we have flagged off this issue. Hopefully, there will be more such discussions and more clarity on what the government will need to do to overcome some of the major problems which we have seen in allocation and exploration of natural resources. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. T.S.R. Subramanian, Anil, Razdan, Prashant, Bhushan, and Paranjoy, Guha, Thakurta. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue, the big picture, same time on Monday. Meanwhile, have a great weekend.